afternoon, Eugene and Paul. How are you?
Good, Jana. Good.
Great. So today is part 4 of our Agenda 2030 series. Part 1, for anyone that missed it, was an interview with Sandy Adams talking about the SDGs. Part 2 was with Sandy Adams breaking down the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, what they say they mean versus what they really mean for us. Part 3, Eugene did an interview with Paul. If you haven't seen that yet, it's how the SDGs got into the government in Ireland and into our policies. And today we are going to talk about how the SDGs have infected every aspect of our life here in Ireland. So you may have missed the last one. I'll introduce Paul is an independent researcher, and most of you watching our podcast will also know Eugene, who's an independent researcher, and myself, I'm founder of the Natural Women's Council, campaigning for the rights and well-being and freedom of women, children, and families in Ireland and further afield. So I'll turn it over to you, Eugene and Paul, and I'll jump in with any questions. And also my role in this is I try to break things down to keep them really simple for people who may just be coming on board as to what this is. So if you get a little too technical because of your deep research, or there's something that I need to understand myself or for our public, please don't mind if I just jump in and kind of keep it as straightforward and simple as I can, if that's okay.
Sure, sounds good.
All right, over to you.
Thanks, Jana. I think a natural follow-on really from the last conversation that myself and Eugene had focuses on the NGOs and the role, the privileged role that they play in Irish society. Like we spoke in the last podcast about the privilege they're afforded with regards to media regulation under the super complaints scheme, and as well as one of the only contributors to Ireland's voluntary national review in reviewing our performance with regard to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And it all ties back to Goal 17, partnerships for the goals. And one very interesting aspect of that goal and a subset of that goal that it kind of flashed off the page at me last week actually, is indicator 17.17.1, which essentially measures the amount of US dollars committed to public-private partnerships for infrastructure. So effectively what that's saying is that attainment of the goals requires investment in external bodies away from the actual government itself, in perpetuity, really, that the goal is self-sustaining the goals. It's that we continue to seek out NGO solutions rather than democratic policy-led solutions. And if you look at all of the goals from zero poverty and zero hunger, the first couple of goals, right down through climate action and whatever else, each of those can always pose a problem for mankind as a whole, for Ireland and for our citizens. And if the overarching framework is for the Sustainable Development Goals to be the blueprint for remedying those problems, then you're always going to be more and more wedded to the SDGs. And we were talking in the last podcast about how, regardless who you vote for, if you vote for the current government parties, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, if you vote for Sinn Féin as the leading opposition party at the moment, or the Soc Dems who are rising, you're just going to get the same thing. This embedding of the SDGs into the way that Ireland is run is really only accelerating. And I know we've got 4 years to go before the end of 2030 and the conclusion of this round, but that's just the conclusion of this round. The SDGs are here to stay. And as we spoke about in the last conversation as well, Eugene, this is all under the umbrella of voluntary, non-binding accords. So what could be the harm in involuntary accords, you can always step out of them. But the thing I kind of finished with in the last article that I wrote, which is a follow-on to the 5-part series that I'd done, was when you have a voluntary accord at policy level, at national government level, and at local government level, as we've seen, it stops being voluntary after that point. It's voluntary for the administrators to accept it or not. It's voluntary to embed through the SDGs and the senior officials group that we have in the Irish government and the Interdepartmental Working Group. That's all voluntary, yes, at a government level, at a policy-making level, decision-making level. But once it's embedded, the voluntary aspect goes away. So for the citizen on the ground, there's no opt-out, there's no opt-in. They don't have a choice. It's just embedded in policy. And you'll see with the digital ID, which they're conveniently calling a digital wallet, a nice little euphemism to hide the fact that it's essentially just a tag, for all of us. I think that the line the government is currently using with this, and it's been used before, is mandatory but not compulsory. So if you want access to public services, you have to have a government ID. But what happened to voluntary? There is no voluntary aspect to it. So it's kind of it's an interesting way of wrapping up these SDGs. Goal number 17, the SDG that focuses on perpetuating the SDGs through the civil society architecture. And Ireland is a great case study for that, because we have so many NGOs, and as we all know, the NGOs in Ireland have become so heavily dependent on exchequer funding, more so, I would say, and I can't verify this, but I would say more so than any other country. In the cases of some NGOs, they're dependent on the exchequer for 97-98% of their funding. So it's convenient, I would say, to have partnerships for the goals there at the end of the SDGs, as a way of just looping back through them again.
Could a party differentiate themselves and stand up and say, no more being run by this, this coup, this United Nations SDGs, these unelected bureaucrats? How can we break free without having an entire new, replacement in the Dáil?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, Jana, that the architecture lies beneath the Dáil. Really, it's through the civil service that the SDGs run. So you're right to say that whether you're right or left in political terms, it kind of doesn't make a difference, because this framework has been able to infiltrate so many areas of society. We have steered left, and I don't think there's any real doubting of that. There's a very much an ideological lean taking us in one direction, and it's only when you sit back and take a look at it that you realize, well, certainly if you look at the last 10 years, would most Irish people be satisfied with the way things are going? I don't think so. But to answer your question, how do you deconstruct it if that were to be the plan? I think it starts with setting the expectation with the political parties. So when you come to election, as me and Eugene spoke about the last conversation, when you come to an election, you go with a manifesto to the people, and if you believe in the SDGs, surely it'll be front and center in your manifesto and your plans for government. But that's not the case. The only manifesto from the previous election that references them was the Soc Dems. And there might have been tiny reference to sustainability somewhere else. Maybe, I think it was in Fine Gael's. But I think as an electorate, that's the expectation that we should be setting, is that, well, where do you stand on the SDGs? And to ask that question, and to have it really, in my view, it should be the number one issue for the next local elections and the next general elections, which are still some years away. But I think building awareness towards that is the starting point. But the challenge, I suppose, is in deconstructing that level of influence at a civil service level. So if you look at the Interdepartmental Working Group on the SDGs, they're responsible for implementation of the SDGs. the SDGs have a representative inside every single department of government. So the first thing you'd be doing is saying, well, you're removing those people from their roles, or else you're changing the remit and saying, well, actually, we're going to scrap the SDGs as the blueprint, and we're going to come up with a blueprint that's actually made by the Irish people and for the Irish people, because that's really what democracy is about. If your listeners or viewers to this podcast were to take it upon themselves to familiarize themselves with the 17 goals, and then see how Irish life has changed over the last 10 years in those regards, then you see the pattern emerging. The motivations behind it, I think there is a much longer conversation, as you've alluded to, Eugene. But just in practical terms, you look at the last decade in reality for people in terms of goal 7, affordable and clean energy. Like, as you said, Jana, we're destroying rural Ireland with solar panels and wind farms, and destroying communities because the farmer leases his land for wind turbines and the prospect of a big payout, or solar farms in the same instance. He's then targeted by the local community. You know, it's dividing and fracturing communities, but the people behind it don't really care about that. And citizens as a whole, more broadly in Ireland, are paying now the dearest prices on electricity in all of Europe, and that continues as a thread throughout all of the goals. I think number 8 focuses on decent work and economic growth. There's interference in that as well through the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and there's the Working Time Directive. All of these things can be traced back to the SDGs. One of the ones that kind of really got under my skin was goal 10 on reduced inequalities. Like, if you look at the course of the last 10 years, and particularly since the lockdown period around COVID, Ireland has had a broadening wealth gap. If you look at the rent to owner wealth gap in Ireland, I think is 38-1 at the minute. House affordability, rent affordability is in crisis, and our economy is geared towards those vulture funds. So the vulture funds of today are the bondholders of the Celtic Tiger crash. You know, it's the same institutions, just orchestrated in a different way. And I suppose if I was to try and to summarize where we're headed, if you look at, say, the next generation of Irish people, our kids and their kids behind them, the path they're on right now, if you look at it, is, as I said, unaffordable housing, that kind of demographic replacement. The ethnicity of Ireland is effectively to be changed forever, and I'll be called a racist for daring to say that. And we're taxed then to the hilt to pay for the NGOs that bring in this ideology that we don't really agree with. And Jana, you went on to the demonization of carbon, and that's goal 10, I think, is the climate action goal. The IPCC themselves have stood down their most extreme model, and this is the thing that maddens me, really, as somebody who has a postgrad in data analytics. The whole climate argument is based on computer models. And what are computer models? They're estimates based on data that human beings feed into a computer. And the models are constructed by people. And the models have been proven to be wrong, consistently wrong, so much so that the people promoting the models have had to stand them down and say, actually, that scariest target that we said, or the scariest forecast we produced, that's never actually going to happen. But that was a conspiracy theory only 6 months ago. So it's just, I suppose, for people to connect the dots between what they're hearing in the media, what they're seeing on the street, and these SDGs, which are the blueprint, and the things pulling the levers really are the people that are implementing this blueprint across society.
To go back to the CO2 thing, and again, we showed it in one of the videos with Sandy, that in 2026, China will actually deploy more, they'll bring on board more coal power stations in the year of 2026 than in the previous 18 years. And they're not retiring them. They're retiring them at a very slow rate. We'll show the graph on the screen so people can see it. And they give kind of a lip service that, oh, we might start reducing coal after 2020 or 2030, and maybe get to net zero by 2050. Yeah, believe that. Believe it or not. There used to be a TV series called Ripley's Believe It or Not. So people can look at that. And the other country that is bringing in coal is India, huge contribution. We could get to net zero tomorrow and it would have no difference, zilch, zero difference on the world situation. If China don't go net zero, we're dead based on the projections people were making. Do you think that the Chinese probably have an idea that we're not going to be dead? If you look at Dubai and the amount of reclamation of land, and you look at the development that they're doing there with the reclaimed land, do you think that they think the ocean is going to rise by 5 meters or 10 meters in the next 50 years? Where billionaires are building mansions on brand new reclaimed land that's just above the sea level? Do you think those people are stupid? No, we're the stupid ones. They know, and the wealth transfer, what's happened is the de-industrialisation of the Western countries, which is what's happened, basically. Decarbonising the countries has also de-industrialised those countries.
Over the past 4 years, announced closures in the European chemical industry increased sixfold, representing a loss of almost 10% of the European chemical production capacity. In countries like ours, Germany, the Netherlands and France, the situation is simply dramatic. We are at the brink of an existential crisis. The decarbonisation of Europe will become synonymous with its de-industrialisation and eventually with its poverty and its irrelevance.
I think, Janet, the other thing, and we see it in the comments sometimes, people debate, what this is this communism, is this far right, far left? And I would argue it's actually a mixture of all. It's technocracy first and foremost. I mean, it's modern day technocracy control, right? And it has elements of communism, globalism, no borders, destroying the family, communist principle, right? So it also has elements of fascism, which is the public-private partnership thing, where the Irish government is getting in bed with Blackrock, for example, Vanguard, or getting in bed with the social media companies to work against the Irish people through censorship, for example. That's fascism. By definition, that's fascism. Corporates working with the government, the two hand in hand. So you've got all three there. You've got technocracy, which, you've got communism, and you've got and that's why it's so complicated. And people think, oh no, this isn't this. It isn't communism. It isn't this. It's something else. We see what it is, and what it is definitely is taking the sovereignty away, 100%. Like, that's part of it. And there's definitely elements of the other two things as well. And when you raise the thing about, it's not just the NGOs, I think, Paul, with that last one, with the public-private partnership is, we're very deep in bed with some of these corporates.
It's very true. And I think it's convenient, really, that much of the public discourse focuses on left versus right, and journalism as a profession is overwhelmingly left leaning anyway. People who go into journalism, and if you look at how Irish media and journalism is funded at the moment, it all comes through Coimisiún de Meán, which is itself a diversity project under the UNESCO umbrella. So
A group, just to cut in there about Coimisiún de Meán, a group of independent researchers that I'm working with did a phenomenal piece of work. I have the spreadsheet in my house. It's the A3 pages, and it's dozens of them, line item by line item, how many grants Coimisiún de Meán has given to media. And that was information was sent to Nick Delahanty, who started posting it online, and he did a great job getting it into the public. But since Coimisiún de Meán came into replaced the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland. I think it was 2023, if I recall. They have given 84 million euros to media. So they're supposed to be the media watchdog, but they're giving 84 million to the media to tell us what to see, hear, and think.
But just I suppose to finish that point on the left versus right, when you have such a left-leaning media and you have media funded by Coimisiún na Meán, which is following the same ideology as the UN SDGs, it becomes the left versus right argument becomes a bit of a David versus Goliath battle in PR terms, and that's why you see it now. Like as I said at the start, the far right holds maybe 1 to 2% of the entire vote in Ireland. The far left holds 30+%, and yet the far right are the overwhelming bad guy as regards the public perception. You know, so it's not a level playing field, and this is where journalism really is letting the people down, because the journalism is supposed to be the referee in the middle. You know.
Yeah, they're very biased, and if we had a proper media in Ireland, if we had a proper media that wasn't just spouting out propaganda to, tell people what to think, we wouldn't be in this situation. If there were any mainstream journalists who did their job, people would know what's happening, but they are paid to make sure people don't know what's happening. So we have independent people like us trying to get the truth out without any funding, going up against 32,000 NGOs and all the parties. So we really have our work cut out. The Irish people see these SDGs, in their local park, in the bee garden, and they think it's all about keeping the earth green, clean, and sustainable. I see them at my local library and, around the kids section, these beautiful colored blocks. And the promise of the SDGs to the Irish people is to create a more sustainable, equitable, and prosperous world by 2030. Ireland is at 80% compliance with SDGs, and the rest of the world is about 12%. But if everyone stops and looks out the window, are we seeing the promised utopia? There's just over 1,200 days left until 2030. And most would agree that we're moving more towards a dystopia than a utopia, where our freedoms and our prosperity and our sovereignty and nationhood is now flattened. And we look at Ireland, I moved here 23 years ago. Ireland has some of the richest seas for fishing and the richest land for farming. But if you were to fly a drone over Ireland, you'd see our beautiful farmland being covered up with solar farms, wind farms. You'd see farmers getting paid $1,200 an acre to sell off their land to rent to these green, sustainable energies. But we have the highest energy cost in the Europe, maybe even the world. And if you look at our waters, Irish fishermen aren't allowed to fish them, but these globalist trawlers can come in and steal from our waters. So financial sovereignty was taken away with the crash. Ireland absorbed about 50% of all of Europe's debt. So my great-great-great-great-grandchildren will still be paying for the decisions of the government when the big boys rolled into town and they said, oh, the Irish people were reckless, we'll take on that debt. Financial sovereignty gone, food sovereignty gone, energy sovereignty gone. So we are becoming more and more reliant as an Irish people on the globalist, and reliance means control.
Yeah, absolutely. And even you mentioned the Irish seas, and the rich fishing resource. There's also the seaweed. So seaweed harvesting would have been a massive tradition off the West Coast for generations, really. And effectively, wherever your land met the sea is where you had rights to harvest the seaweed. But the government have sold that to, I think, a Canadian multinational as well. So, but you're seeing it right across society, Jana. And if you were to go through the goals, like you mentioned, the Troika bailout there, it fits in perfectly with the first goal, no poverty. What no poverty actually means, if you break it down, is, well, everybody from the middle incomes down to lower incomes, they're all going to end up in the one basket, because
it hollows out the middle class. So you're either the elites, who I call instead of elites, I call them parasites. The parasites just feed off all the people on the bottom. They're just hollowing out the middle class. So we'll all be at the bottom, reliant upon the government. And about poverty and hunger, I talked about how Ireland has this beautiful, rich green land. When you're flying in on the Aer Lingus plane, it's like a patchwork quilt of beautiful green land, at least not all covered by solar and wind farms yet. But with poverty and hunger, our health and well-being should also be at unprecedented levels. And given the billions that is flowing into Irish coffers, we should really be a glistening jewel in the Atlantic. We should be like the Dubai of Europe. I mean, we are a financial playground for big pharma, big tech, all these big companies, but we're not getting any benefit, the Irish people, to any of these big global companies and these big data centers. We should be the glistening, a jewel of the Atlantic.
But it's just an interesting dynamic that when your backs are to the wall, not everybody is inclined to fight. And maybe it's because this, like Eugene has used the boiling the frog analogy, this has happened over such a long period of time. These goals, if you take them all in isolation, they appear benign. And Jana, you had mentioned earlier that you might have some people who are concerned about neutrality, for instance. You might have other people who think there's overreach in education, and I know you guys have covered that to a huge degree. We don't all have to agree on absolutely everything, but it's when you start digging below the surface that you see the common thread that runs through all of this is that blueprint, that framework for governance, and it goes into health. SDG 3 on good health and well-being. Are we 81% of the way to a perfect health service when we have 800,000 plus people on waiting lists? The scoliosis scandal. You can go right down through the goals, and you can just pick them apart and see that we're 81% of the way towards nothing in terms of delivering a better society for Irish people, but maybe in terms of ticking boxes for implementing that supranational framework so that we can be the good boys in the class for the United Nations. Then absolutely, yeah.
I think what we're seeing is the alignment between the corporates, if I put it that way, the corporates, the billionaires, and what we would describe as technocracy and communism. And the open borders suits some of these people because they can get in very cheap labor. It's kind of modern day slavery. You could argue what's happening in Ireland at the moment is modern day slavery. They're off. These guys are riding around on bicycles for Deliveroo. They're stacking shelves in your local petrol station, right? And they're on the lowest salaries they can possibly be, right? And they're subsidized because they're getting their accommodation paid for by the government. So who's benefiting from that? It's the people, the wealthy people. It's the people who run those industries, those businesses. It's the corporates that are making the money out of that. The destruction of our landscape with data centers, that's not the middleman that's getting a benefit. That's the corporates that are getting the benefit from that. And now the scams that we have with green energy, where we're giving fortunes to people. We're not paying the actual production price for wind or solar. We're paying the nominal marginal price for it, which is the highest price you can pay. Like it's the same as a carbon-based fuel, which is great. And again, that's down to the government. So there's an uneasy mix here. The left are aligned actually with the objectives of corporates. The people who think they're greening the world and they're all on the left and they want equity and everything are aligned with the policies of the super rich. From day one, this has been the strategy with the United Nations. From absolutely day one, global government has been on the cards. That's what they want. And they kind of dress it up with the peacemaking and all this kind of stuff and feeding the poor and all that. There's a history prior to the Earth Summit that tells you an awful lot what was going on. And the climate change became the game changer for them. They've been trying to do this in other ways. And sustainable development, the whole idea of climate change, the carbon-based economy, and carbon dioxide became the boogeyman. So it's not just the far right, it's CO2 is a boogeyman, right? And everybody in the world has to work against it. And they've done a fantastic job at brainwashing everybody with that.
So really important to let your children know, because climate is being pushed in school. Greta Thunberg telling children the earth's on fire. That's something that will very easily manipulate children and adults, because who doesn't want a clean earth? I do. Who doesn't want clean air and water? I do. But that's very different to the climate alarmism and the carbon credit system. And when digital ID rolls out, you can be sure that it will track everything you do. And eventually it can track, what are you spending your money on? How far have you traveled those 15-minute cities? You've traveled too far. We're going to switch off your account, switch off your right to travel. If that sounds dystopian, you can look at our podcast we did with Sandy Adams recently about the 15-minute cities.
Well, Jana, the dystopian stuff is happening in front of our eyes.
Yeah.
We see what's coming out of Ursula von der Leyen's mouth, right? And she might as well be a dictator in either a fascist state or a communist state. Either one, I don't care. I'm not going to get into the far right, the argument, because what she's looking to introduce in terms of censorship and control is totalitarian. It really is. So people need to wake up. We're up against technocrats and totalitarians. My hypothesis is that what we teach in the schools right now, this critical social justice theory, taught in schools and taught in universities and in all the institutions. Every institution that's bought into critical social justice theory is also an advocate for Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. All the political parties who we would describe as woke wear the little pin, as we showed in the last video. They all wear the little pin. They all support the SDGs.
Yeah.
They're one and the same, because they pumped this stuff into the universities. They had to do that first, because you need to build up a groundswell of activists and supporters and people like that.
I think what will grab people's attention really is how pervasive the UN SDGs have come. Like you've described kind of something close to an end game in terms of where this is headed. And that's, I suppose, a leap of faith for people that they kind of find hard to kind of connect from where we are today. But that's the whole idea, really, is that it's such a slow and deliberate process. But if you go through the goals, like we've already, I think, mentioned the no poverty and zero hunger goals, and the response to those goals, then, as I was saying, is to create more NGOs, which are funded by the taxpayer to align to policies that Irish people mightn't necessarily agree with. And we spoke about health as well. Then the other thing that we haven't kind of gone into in any great detail, and it's probably a conversation for another day because it's a big one, is this WHO pandemic treaty. It's not a direct UN SDG, but you can see the connection to SDG 3 and good health and well-being. But the thing that really kind of sticks with me, and the reason that I started writing about this stuff really is, if you go back to the 2024 referenda, it's the absolutely massive disconnect between what the government is doing and the will of the people. And you saw that with the results of the family amendment and the care amendment. I think the family amendment was rejected 67-33 versus the care amendment was 74-26, something around those numbers. So there was a huge disconnect. And if you look at gender equality, goal 5, SDG goal 5 for gender equality, I mean, a man today can be a woman tomorrow and enter women's spaces. This denial of biological reality, XY chromosomes, and the physical makeup of man versus woman. This manipulated language that we're hearing everywhere now. Pregnant people was a good one. It's just this kind of ludicrous stuff that people are seeing day to day. Biological men, women winning in women's sports, because they can't win in men's sports, so they jump into women's sports. This kind of stuff is what's just making people sit up and go, well, what the hell is going on? Why are men allowed into women's bathrooms, and why are men in women's prisons? It's so far removed from what we would consider to be kind of the normal order in Ireland that it feels like we've just gone down the rabbit hole into Alice in Wonderland, and it's very different. But if you trace it back, the policies can all be traced back to this blueprint, this blueprint for sustainable development, and climate is just the Trojan horse to to bring all this stuff in.
Well, it is, and you see, and we will do another session on the whole population reduction, because population reduction is also part of it. And now the gender equality one, SDG 5, which is gender equality, which was supposed to be the referendum, that's also the that's queer theory, that's feminist theory, that's postmodern feminist theory.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see the relationship there? The very same theory is actually encapsulated within the SDG, right? The SDG is delivering the theory. So if you're a woke person who believes all that stuff and promotes it, you'll be absolutely on board with SDG 5, and you'll want to bring it into our constitution, which all the Irish establishment are.
Yep.
So QED, it's unambiguous. The very same people, and I'll repeat it again, who are into the SDGs are into all the woke stuff, and the very same people who are into the woke stuff are into the SDGs. They're one and the same. And as I've always said, Jan, on this, you've heard like a broken record. It's a full course meal. You don't agree with one thing and disagree with something else. If you're woke, you're fully on board with all of the SDGs. Yep. You're fully on board with all of the critical social justice theories.
Exactly.
You're on board with critical race theory. You're on board with post-colonial theory. The whole 9 yards. Go on, John.
Eugene, you mentioned the Malthusian, Thomas Malthus, believe that, the Malthusian principle is there's too many people on the earth and we need to depopulate. Well, there's a conference called rethinkinggrowth.ie. So that Rethinking Growth conference, again, funded by Malthusians and fossil fuel industrialists. The event was sponsored by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Guess who was on the panel there is no one other than People Before Profit, Paul Murphy. So if we go back to, we talked about these parties that claim to be all about for people and they're left and liberal. Why was Paul Murphy, People Before Profit, at a conference sponsored by the Rockefellers and fossil fuel people about degrowth? And if he's all about people, it's actually profit before people, these champagne socialists. And the other thing is how it's infiltrated society. We came across a conference on degrowth that is sponsored by no one other than Fáilte Ireland. Our tourism body, publicly funded, it's meant to be all about supporting growth and tourism and having people come to Ireland to spend money. I wrote a complaint letter to Fáilte. They said, oh, we don't have to agree with everything that they do to be able to be there. But no, they're sponsoring it. And this is a conference about degrowth. So even our tourism body is sucked into the SDGs and talking about how we're going to degrow Ireland.
So there's a huge issue here. We're being played on multiple fronts. I'll give you another example. We talked about the carbon thing. Consider the migration issue in Ireland right now, where we're not really vetting anybody coming into the country. And you think that that's a generous and a kind thing to do? And what about the genuine people, the genuine migrants who should be coming in, the families, the children who should be coming in? What's happening to them? How are the people, how is Catherine Connolly and the people on the left thinking about the genuine people who should be coming in? And instead you don't care, you'll just let in all these men, right? Because most of them are single men. That's what's happening with the unvetted people.
Astonishing this week to see that I think there were, of all the brutal murders of women, I think there were 8 or 9. Like 90% were done by migrants. But then Ivana Bacik and all of the other, communists out there, oh, Irish man bad and the toxic masculinity. And we need to really work on, speak to your boys about violence against women. No, don't give these migrant crimes to an Irish man. Yeah. Yes, there are crimes that Irish men create, which is why we don't need to flood our borders with unvetted men to create more. So I'm not saying we don't have our own problems on the homeland, but that's a different issue. Yeah. 90% of these crimes are migrants coming in. It wasn't an Irish man that murdered Aisling Murphy. It wasn't an Irish man that decapitated the 2 Sligo gay men in Sligo. It wasn't an Irishman that stabbed those 3 school children in Parnell Square. So let's not give these crimes to the Irishmen, please. These are migrant crimes. Stop gaslighting the women and families in Ireland.
Yeah, and it's not just the left, Jana. Simon Harris as well, saying that the ethnicity of violent offenders isn't relevant. It is absolutely relevant. The point you're making is just nail on the head, really. And I think it's a sentiment that would resonate with most Irish people. Like, obviously, there are people who, as you said, Eugene, are all in on woke, and you have to be either all in on it or not. And maybe that's why it's been able to get to the level that it's gotten to, because the rest of us just stick to the principles that we were reared on, and we fight our own battles. But if you're on that kind of woke bandwagon, you're all in, you're 100% in, and you're fighting in such a partisan way on every issue. You know, like, society should normally be about different people coming from different backgrounds and different perspectives and agreeing a set of policies that drive the country. But it's our way or the highway with the lefties, and they have zero tolerance. Like, these people call themselves the tolerant left. It's just a joke. They have zero tolerance for anybody that is even remotely right to them on the political spectrum, and that's the reality.
Yeah, no, it's totalitarian.
It's all inverted. You know, we talk about
and
it's all the inversion of the language. So anyone listening needs to really, really get that the language is inverted. So, you know, if you don't trans your child, you're not kind. But actually, is it kind to give a child irreversible puberty blockers and give them surgeries and sterilize them? No, that's not kind. They say, you know, we're all about diversity until you have a different view, a dissenting voice, or diverse thought. So really, we're not about diversity. Inclusivity, everybody included. No, you only include people who you want to think like you, group think. So this whole kindness, inclusivity, and diversity is codswallop, because it with them, it's actually the opposite. It's completely the inversion.
Absolutely. And sorry, Eugene, go ahead.
Yeah, well, just a point of information. I mean, on the whole migration thing, arguably every single SDG is linked to migration. Every single one of them. There's reduced inequalities, which is your number 10, right? So migrants, equality, education. We in the last 10 years, we've doubled the number of people from overseas students coming to our universities in the last 10 years. And one of the reasons for that is because it's very lucrative. It's very lucrative for the universities to do that, right? So, not that they're not being kind; they're just making more money. You know, so these people could go elsewhere. There's gender equality is another one. Is linked to to migration. Every single one of the SDGs actually has a migration element to it. The problem we have with our politicians right now is it is the agenda. So if something ticks the box that it's part of the agenda, they're not going to in any way go against it. It doesn't matter what you or I say, what proof, whatever you put out, they're not. It's in the agenda and it's going to happen. Now, the only thing that stops them is if it has to go to a referendum, and we had our say in 2024. And we should have our say again, because I think there's issues that have been introduced that have been unconstitutional, I would suspect, Paul and Janet. I think if somebody did a rigorous view of what's going on right now, including the fact that the whole Agenda 2030 has been adopted and embedded in our system without the Irish people being informed.
Yeah, they're not informed. And it even comes down to smaller things, Eugene, you know, that people mightn't link to the SDGs. Like, you look at the return scheme, that absolute nuisance of having to bring bottles to your local supermarket when you used to just put the plastic bottles in your blue bin or your green bin or whatever it is. It's just a nuisance for the consumers. It's a nuisance for the retailers. It's private profiteering, but it ticks the box for SDG goal 12, I think it is, responsible consumption. And you see it everywhere. We talked about climate, goal 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions, hate speech, the social media bans, the migration pact, Eugene, government wallet ID. I suppose the thing you mentioned right back at the start, Jana, the 81% of the way towards this utopia. Like, the last SDG I mentioned was peace and justice. You know, we have more sexual violence reports in Ireland in 2024 than ever in our history. So we're not doing too good on that goal. But I just encourage people to reflect on each of the goals that we've spoken about, and maybe have a look at the rest of them and see how has Ireland progressed over the course of the last 10 years. Just kind of sit down and have a think about it. Like, we went through all of the areas where life has has disimproved, or at least the headline ones. Like,
Yeah.
we're looking at an energy, water, and cost of living crisis as well, which I don't even think we got into in any great detail. And we're being told that we might get another once in a lifetime pandemic. You know, there's just so many strands to this that make no sense. And the policies then that are designed in response to the challenges that come at us through our day-to-day lives, the policies do not originate from Irish people. They don't come from political commons. They don't come from the grassroots. They come from on top, and they're given to our politicians, and they enact them without any questions. You know, we're part of a global governance system, whether we like it or not. The only question is, what do we do from here?
On our plan was really for the next, which will probably in about a month's time, we would do one on the digital wallet and the whole issue of digital currency, because the digital euro is coming fast. We've seen it. There's recent more announcements on that. That's coming. So we need to give people a full briefing on that one, and that's directly linked. Digital ID is linked to every single SDG as well. And it's seen as fighting poverty. It's associated with all the SDGs. So it comes from there. Even though it's coming through Europe, people need to understand that Europe are just a proxy for this stuff. The European Commission, EU are a proxy for the same stuff. It's the same agenda that comes through them. So that's the next one. And then the one after that we were going to do was do a roundup of the education SDG 4, because we've covered bits of it, but there's all this stuff called education for sustainable development, global citizenship education. There's the critical pedagogy stuff in schools. There's the sex education, gender stuff in schools. So we want to wrap all of those together so that in one part of this series, we'll have that parents can watch that and they'll get all that. This is all the education related to Agenda 2030.
We have an international child protection task force with 7 other countries, and everywhere is seeing exactly the same thing in lockstep. So it's not just Ireland, it's New Zealand, Australia, US, Canada, England, Wales, and further afield.
Yeah. Because anything else, Paul, from you before we wrap this one up? I think.
No, I just say keep up the good work. I know the amount of time that goes into research, and even just one series like what I did covering this topic. And you guys have done an awful lot of work over the last number of years, really. And there's monster amount of work going on behind the scenes that people aren't even aware of. But it's just about getting the word out there and letting people just consume the facts and then make up their own mind.
Look for our continued podcast series on Agenda 2030. Look for, leaflets that we're going to be designing on this when we get funding for that, maybe a website, and really just, helping break it down. So everyone just talk to your friends and neighbors. That's what we ask everyone to do, because mainstream media is not going to cover any of this. So thanks, Paul and Eugene, for that. And if you haven't watched again, part 1, 2, and 3, they're already out. And we look forward to 5, 6, and 7. So thanks to both of you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Tom.